Hello and welcome to my review of the Leica Q2 for wedding photographers specifically.
The first step to buying a Leica Q2 is to sell your car. Sorry, Tim.
I hope that you enjoy that intro. I have been a wedding photographer for a lot of years now, 15 plus years. I started when I was 18 years old, and it was really awkward because I was 18 and my couples were way older than me, and there's very difficult social gap to fill when you're very introverted and very quiet and you just kind of want to hang out in a corner and fly on the wall style. I have photographed at least, I'm going to say 600-700 weddings in my career, primarily with Nikon products. I come from a Nikon background. The D850 is my current camera, and the D50 was my original kind of bridge to the Nikon system, and I've just kind of stuck with it from there. I like Nikon because of the skin tones. I like Nikon just because of the physical functionality of the devices. I feel like they make good products that just they do well in a full day scenario. Canon also does great things as well. Sony, if you're more of a primarily video shooter, it is definitely a great option as well. And then on the flip side of that, if you're way more just like photography only, Fuji is also a very good option. So there's lots of good options, and I'm here today to talk about the Leica Q2 and my experiences over the past couple of weeks with it. I took this camera to a few weddings. I've taken this camera to a shoot in Paris and Iceland. We did some landscape photos. Basically, I'm kind of taking this Leica Q2 out of its comfort zone a little bit.
Now you might be saying to yourself, this is obviously not a camera for wedding photographers, it's more for street photography, but I really wanted it, and I kind of gave into the unattainability of it. I thought that it was going to make my images a lot better, that I was going to jump a lot higher and hit more three-pointers and get cast as David Hasselhoff on the reboot of Baywatch and book more weddings because of it, but it turns out only really photographers care.
I guess I will mention right here that I am not going to be keeping this camera. That while I love this camera for a lot of things, I don't believe it's the correct choice for weddings if you're a very fast shooter like I am. If you're a little bit of a slower, more collected shooter, for lack of a better description, that you have the time and you set things up perfectly and you hit the button, this camera could work very, very well for you. In my wedding days, I'm never working with people that are really that comfortable in front of the camera, so I'm doing a lot of frames really quickly because I want all those variations where they actually look comfortable in one, rather than kind of like posing it exactly how I want it. So that's kind of, I guess, my outlook on weddings, is that I shoot really fast because I want those in-between shots where they're not thinking about like what do they do with their hands, because I'm never really working with professional models. I'm gonna start with all the things I love about this camera, and then I'm gonna talk about the deal breakers for me as a wedding shooter. The thing that I love the most is just the feeling of this camera in your hands. If you've ever held a Leica M series device, it's unlike any other camera that you will ever put in your hands. For me, I guess maybe one of the weird drawbacks, I guess, is that it's very much designed as a horizontal camera, which I feel like most photojournalism work is. I find that shooting a lot of portraits, I'm in vertical mode a lot, and this camera doesn't really lend itself that well. It feels a little silly kind of using it in vertical mode. So if you're a horizontal primarily shooter, great camera. If you shoot a lot more vertical, I would say I'm like almost 70% verticals versus horizontals this year when I'm doing photo only coverage. Obviously when I'm doing video coverage, it's always horizontal, but for verticals it does feel a little bit weird. The other thing I love about this camera is the size and the fact that it's just one lens. It's 28mm 1.7, which is a great focal length. It's a bit weird to get used to, I think. I really do prefer either 24 or 35, but with this camera, this little back button here, you have a 28mm lens, you hit this button, you go to 35, you hit this button again, you go to 50, you hit this button, you go to 75. So you lose megapixels as you go, but the full size megapixel at 28 really is almost, in my opinion, too big. I shoot my Nikon D850 at mid-size RAW files, which I think is like 24 megapixels, and that's kind of where I'm happiest. One interesting thing to note is when you're doing that zoom, you're not actually changing the file, so you're still shooting the full file, but when you load your file up in Lightroom, it just shows you the crop line, so it'll show you the preview of the image where you've cropped it to 50mm in camera, but if you hit the crop tool, you can go back out to the full file size of 28mm, which I don't think is necessary for me. I'd probably prefer just to have my cards last a little bit longer rather than being taking up space. Each of the RAW files in this camera, I believe, are like 85 to 90, which is pretty gigantic. The positive is that a lot of the time, the JPEGs that it's actually rendering out of this camera is what I would be using in most situations, because the color science that they put into the JPEG files is second to none. They are by far my favorite looking JPEGs that I've ever seen out of a camera. So I like the fact that you can zoom. I like the fact that you can zoom in video mode as well. But we're gonna get to one of the deal breakers in video mode, which might not even be a consideration for you if you are just a wedding photographer that's photography only, that you just wanna have this camera for pictures and horizontal pictures at that, and large size pictures. The images that come off of this camera are absolutely phenomenal, as well as the feeling, as well as the ability to zoom quickly within that, which is very, very helpful for video, as well as the menu system is just super simple that it kind of puts everything else, specifically Sony, to shame with just how simple they can just make the menu system. So if I was just a day-to-day photographer and I had the ability to purchase this camera and I was doing photos of my friends or family or whatever as just like a single camera to have, this would probably be the one. That just to create travel work, to create personal work kind of on the go, this is a fantastic tool. With a price tag like this camera actually has, I would expect it to have been, I guess, more of a faster professional grade tool. And let's get into a bit of the negatives and the reasons why I'm not keeping this camera. So the reason number one is that the price tag is quite expensive. It's very much a luxury item. And with that luxury price tag, I feel like you should almost be receiving a somewhat perfect camera. One thing that they did for me that's, I guess, really disappointing as a video shooter is that, to my knowledge, please correct me if I'm wrong, I went online, I searched everywhere, apparently this was an issue with the Q as well, is that there is no manual video mode abilities. So even though you have all the manual controls, like right here, and you have ISO on this little secret hidden button, you can't put it into manual video mode. And this might not, like if you're a street photographer, like this does not matter at all to you because you're probably not shooting video. But as a hybrid shooter at a wedding day, I kind of wanted this to replace my backup Nikon body with a wide angle lens. It has stabilization in the lens, so it's very good at video. And the ability to go from 28 to 35 to 50 to 75 is amazing. But the fact that I can't lock the settings down is kind of unfortunate and really does make the camera unusable for me in a professional setting on a wedding day. For travel content and just being out there in the world and shooting video, maybe it's not that big of a deal, but I really don't like to see kind of the exposure wash of brighter and darker as I move through scenarios. I just want to lock it down, and if something bright enters that scene, I don't want it to recalibrate based on that. I just want it to continue doing what I set it to do. The other issue and the main deal breaker for me is that I feel like I'm always just like pinned right up against the buffer on this camera, that I can take 9 photos and then it's full. And when it's full, it takes a lot longer to write to the card to get you back to a point where you can actually take a photo. So I would find myself just like kind of being stuck with a couple trying to take a photo and just like keep hitting the button until I'm able to take a single photo. And that's like a very awkward 5 seconds. 5 seconds feels like it's like 20 minutes in that situation and in that scenario. In here, I actually have the Sony, well not now, it's in my card reader, but I have the Sony Tough, the fast 300 megabytes a second read-write speed card. So I do have the fastest cards, to my knowledge, possible to put in here. And it's still kind of that 9-frame buffer where you hit the wall at that point. All right, I'll do a quick little buffer test here for you. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. There's 9. And now I can't take any more photos. There's 10, 11. And when you're out with a couple or you're out just shooting a wedding, you really do need more speed than that. And that is, again, the fastest card that I can put in that camera, and that's kind of the buffer speed. I thought that my workaround was going to be the fact that I could zoom into like 50 millimeters. So if I was shooting this camera in like crop mode or 35 millimeter mode or 50 millimeter mode, that it would be making smaller files, and I'd be able to get more buffer out of it. So I could just kind of like, as I'm shooting, almost go from like 28 to 35 to try to preserve as much buffer space as I could. But unfortunately, because it's just shooting the full like 28 millimeter files that are 90 megabytes, it does take a long time. So that is my personal, I guess, like dilemma with it. It's the fact that if over like 20, 30 seconds, I can only take about like 10 photos in RAW mode, it's not really a camera that's super functional for me. I would really love to keep this camera around for just personal use, like if I'm going out in the world and I'm not shooting anything professionally or I'm not taking any video, that I'd love to be able to have this with me. But unfortunately, because of the price tag, it's kind of an expensive piece of equipment to keep around, just essentially for a fun camera. If you have the budget to have a fun camera that's worth $5,000, by all means, that's amazing. But unfortunately for me, it's not really a camera that I can afford to be keeping when it doesn't really do the professional tasks that I need it to keep up with. I'm going to be very sad to see it go, but unfortunately it's necessary. I will be continuing to purchase new Leica products to test them out at some point if they do kind of hit the camera that's exactly right for me. I realize that I'm kind of on the fringe of the market that they're designing products for as a wedding photographer. So take all of this information with a grain of salt if you're not a wedding photographer. If you are and you shoot similar to me, or you've watched my videos and you kind of do keep up with that speed of frame rate whenever you're doing something with a couple or they're doing like lots of movement, that you do want to get that exact decisive frame. I don't believe that this is the camera for you. Hopefully that saved you some money. And yeah, that's all. One last thing, maybe my favorite feature. This is a really dumb feature, but whenever you go into macro mode, you actually change the ring. Isn't that fun? This could be a thumbnail too. Here, it's my thumbnail. Those are my thoughts today. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I hope this saved you some money, or it convinced you that it's actually the right camera for you if you are kind of that style of shooter that I talked about. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on another time. Jobin.